We'll start by working with output. I'm going to show you how to deal with what comes back and how what comes back from a remoted command is a little bit different than what you might get with a locally run command. The real key here that I'm going to emphasize is to push as much of your command processing as possible over to the remote computer so that whatever it eventually does send back is pretty much exactly what you need to create your output display or text file or whatever else. Now, going the other direction, I'll show you how to take a value that's in a local variable and pass that as an input argument to the remote command. It's not hard, but there's definitely a little trick to it, and it's not immediately obvious, and unless, of course, you've been reading the help files, in which case it will be very, very obvious. So we'll see if you picked that up. Let's start by discussing dealing with output. So the majority of the stuff we're going to be talking about is working with invoke command. So really quickly, let's just pop something together. Get event log, minus log name, security, newest 10. And we'll do that from the computer dc.lab.pri and member.lab.pri. So I'm going to retrieve the 10 most recent security event log entries from those two computers. Now I want to let's hit enter. We see that it works. I want to pipe that to get member. This is something that I mentioned earlier, but I want to kind of reemphasize. First of all, something I had not mentioned earlier, you'll notice that when you pipe multiple event log entries to get member, that you get multiple get member output chunks. And that's kind of a weird little thing that just occurs to event logs as far as I've seen. And it's because every event log's ID number, its event type, comes across as a separate kind of object that getMember has to look at. In reality, all of these objects are the same. It's just this weird little anomaly because of how getMember sees them. So the thing I wanted to point out was that whatever comes back from a remote computer when you use invoke command is a deserialized object. And this is something, again, that I mentioned earlier. This object was born on a remote machine, serialized into XML, and that means it's no longer a live, functioning, in-memory piece of software. This is just a static representation of what this object looked like on the remote machine at the time it was created. And so the only method we get is the toString method, which is not really going to help us out a lot. Now let's contrast that. Let's take a look at what happens when I run that same getEventLog command, but instead of running it through invoke command, I'm going to use getEventLog's native computer name parameter. Now I'm no longer going to be using PowerShell remoting. This is going to, I guess this is probably going to talk across remote procedure calls, RPCs, using distributed component object model, or DCOM. Frankly, it could be using black magic. There's no way to really look at the command or its help and know what it's using to talk to those remote computers. It's just magic. So we sacrifice a chicken, we hit enter, we get our results. Well, we get it from at least one of the computers. Sadly, because this output doesn't include the computer name, I don't really know. I can guess that it was DC that it was talking to, because that was the first one I listed, but I don't really know. And it looks like it might fail on member probably because of firewall issues. Oh, gosh, it's such a pain not using remoting. Okay, after 3 minutes it finally decides. So let's take member off, because I want to contrast that output from getMember. Let's pipe that to getMember. You'll notice that these event log objects natively have more things associated with them, more methods. Sometimes they'll even have sometimes an additional property or two. That's kind of rare. That would require an unusual situation. If I run that exact same thing locally and pipe it to GM, I get this same layout. So the point is, well, actually, let's draw a picture. When I use remoting, I've got my computer here. This is me, and this will be our remoting scenario. And this is me again in the scenario where I ran the command natively. I did not use remoting. And I've got my computer, my DC computer over here. In the first scenario, the command got sent to the computer ran the command, it produced the output, it serialized the output into XML, which is a text format, and it's a way for that software representation to be encoded in a way that actually can be transmitted. That gets transmitted over to my computer, which deserializes it from XML and creates objects out of that XML. In other words, the only thing my computer can see here is whatever could be successfully serialized into XML. Now, because XML is just text, it's not actual software, I lose all of the functional pieces of the software. I can still know everything about it, but I can't do anything to it. You know, the classic analogy that everybody talks about when we talk about object-oriented programming is a car. So in this case, the domain controller was able to get a fully functioning car. It's got a color, it's got a model, it's got a manufacturer, it's got an engine, it's got wheels and a steering wheel and an accelerator and a brake pedal and all that stuff. But the only thing it can translate to XML is the stuff that it can actually write down. So if you think about the car brochure, that's kind of a text representation of the car. The brochure can tell you what color the car is, and it can tell you what kind of engine it has and how many wheels it has. But what the brochure can't do is turn left, turn right, speed up, and slow down. Those are the functional pieces of the car. We'll get the same thing here. Let's say we were working with processes. The XML can list all of the known attributes of a process, its name, its current CPU utilization, its current virtual memory utilization. But that text description can't kill the process. It can't refresh the process. It can't query information from the process because it's no longer a real piece of software. So that's what you're dealing with when you deal with remoting. Now, what I did the second time, when I just ran getEventLog by itself and used getEventLog's own computer name parameter, I spoke to the remote computer, but I did not ask it to execute anything. I really just queried data. I connected to, I don't know, like I said, it's mostly black magic. I suppose I connected to the EventLog service and said, hey, EventLog service, here's my credentials. I need the 10 most recent security entries. That information was sent, again, black magic. I have no idea what format that's in or anything else. And my computer constructed those EventLog objects for me. That's why those looked just like the EventLog objects when I ran getEventLog without specifying a computer name at all and asked for my local ones. So in terms of dealing with output, what you've got to remember is that remoting is giving you disconnected, dead objects that have been translated into text and objects recreated out of that text. So they're snapshots. They're no longer live. They're no longer active. Sometimes that's going to restrict your functionality. Sometimes that means you might prefer a native approach. The downside is remoting all happens over HTTP. It's a known protocol. It's a single protocol. It's something we can turn on for the entire machine, and any command we choose to send to that machine will work. When you get down to these native commands instead, you don't know what protocol you're dealing with. As in the case of my member computer, it turned out a firewall was up that kept the native command and the native protocol from even connecting. So there's downsides to using the native commands as well. Plus, not every single command has a computer name parameter. Sometimes you're going to want to run a command remotely. It won't have a computer name parameter, and the only way to do it is over remoting. Remoting's the way we're going anyway. That's the way forward. So as much as possible, you should start learning how to work with remoting. And it doesn't actually mean that you need to change what you're doing. You might just need to change the way you're approaching it. Let's take an example here. I want to look at the getProcess command for a second. Let's look at the help for this. You'll notice that it obviously has a computer name parameter, so I can retrieve a list of processes from a remote computer. Okay, that's nice to know. Let's get a list of processes from my domain controller. Let's try and look for something here that we think we can kill without taking the whole machine offline. Oh, a lot of things in service host.exe. Could probably kill win logon. That'd probably be bad. You know what? I can always reboot this thing. Let's kill DNS. Get process, computer name DC, name DNS. Okay. Stop process. Oh, features not supported for remote machines. Oh, sad face. This is a perfect example of what I'm talking about. You start dealing with these individual commands and their individual little protocols and their individual little way of doing things, and you run into a bazillion individual little things that just don't work. Okay, what if we did this instead? You think that would work? Think about it for a second. I'm betting no. Oh, so here's what happened. You really got to think about the pipeline here. The first command, which was this one, ran. Now that went out to this computer and ran this command. The results, which were probably a single process object, were serialized into XML, transmitted back to my computer, deserialized from XML into a dead object, and placed into the pipeline right here. Well, now PowerShell has to do pipeline parameter binding. The first plan, remember, is by value. So it looked at stop process and said, hey, do you have any parameters that can accept objects of the type deserialized.system.diagnostics.process? No, you don't. You could take a live process object, but you can't take a dead deserialized process object. Okay, plan B, by property name. Hey, stop process. I've got these objects in the pipeline. I notice that you have an ID parameter and you have a name parameter. So those objects in the pipeline, they also have ID properties and a name property. So I'm going to feed those values to here. Stop process is fine. I will take it. I see your ID is 1316. So I'm going to try and stop process 1316. Yeah, I don't see a process 1316 here on the local computer. Stop process is trying to stop a process with the ID 1316 on my local computer. It's not trying to do it on the remote computer. So this approach isn't really right. Here's what would work instead. Whenever you're going to send commands to the remote computer, as much as possible, you want all of the processing to happen on the remote computer. Because on the remote computer, this is still a live object. It still represents a piece of software in memory. On the remote computer, this hasn't been serialized into XML yet. So by running this entire command on the remote computer, I'll get what I want. I totally shouldn't be doing this, but I'm going to do it anyway. Yes, I'm sure. All right, let's run get process against the remote computer. And now we have no DNS service. Oy. Invoke command, script block, start service, name DNS. You know I have to have this work. Ooh, I better hope that my local DNS cache still has DC. Looks like it did. Yeah, there's my DNS service again. So that's running as a process again now. Good. So look, in terms of working with output, what you want to do is get all of the processing done on the remote computer so that whatever output you get from the remote computer is essentially the final output you want to display or save to a file or whatever else. Another good example. Invoke command, script block, get process. Do that to dc.lab.pri. Then I want you to sort those by their virtual memory usage in descending order. I want you to select the first 10 and let's format that as a table that contains the property ID, name, and VM. and auto size it. Works fine. It is not what I would do. I want as much of the processing as possible going on the remote computer. Oh, I hit tab to complete, and so it deleted the rest of the line. That's a feature in PowerShell version 2, because it gives you more typing practice. Sort VM descending select first 10. This is how I like to do things when I'm using remoting, because it makes it easy for me to just work with output. I send all of my processing to the remote computer. Whatever I get back is going to go into my pipeline, and the only thing I really want to have to do with it is format it, or perhaps export it, or convert it, or out it to a file or a printer or whatever else. I like to get as much done on the remote machine as possible so that I don't have to actually try and use any functionality of what comes back, because there won't be any. By the time I'm ready to format or export or convert to or out, I don't care about methods. I'm just worried about properties. What information do I actually want to display or convert or export or put into a file or whatever else? So by doing as much of the processing on the remote computer, I get the same output, but here's the trick. Let's add to my property list PS computer name, because that always comes back from invoke command. Now I can add another computer in here. This is an important distinction. If you look at this list, you will notice that I'm getting the top 10 processes by virtual machine for that computer and then for that computer. They start with the biggest one and then work their way down, and then it starts with the biggest one and works its way down. Because I had each computer get its processes, sort them, and select the first 10 before sending that over to my computer as XML. So let's go back to the original example I did, which is here, where I had very little of the processing happening on the remote computer. Let's add a second computer and make sure that my table is going to display the computer name. See, these results are not quite as good. This is not giving me the top 10 processes on each computer. And it's again because I really didn't think about where the processes were working. I asked each computer to send me all of its processes. That's went into the pipeline. So at this point in the pipeline, I've got all of the processes from DC and all of the processes from member. I sorted all of them in descending order, which mixed them up. And then I just grabbed the first 10, which was the first 10 largest ones from both of those computers combined. And then I formatted them into a table. So you really do have to exercise some logic and think about where things are happening. Again, I like to get as much of the processing done on the remote computer as humanly possible so that I don't have to worry about functionality when it comes back to my computer. I'm just ready to display things or export it or whatever else. And what about passing information to the remote computers? For example, let's say I write a little script, and in it I prompt for the name of an event log that I want to get. Okay, so someone runs my little script, they get a prompt like this one, and they type security. Okay, now I've got that in this variable, security. Here's what a lot of folks will try and do. That's what they'll run. And that's what they'll get. And here's why that happens. What's inside this script block gets sent off to the remote computers, but my local copy of PowerShell does not even look at it. it just sends that off as a literal text string. It is not looking in here to replace the $log name variable with its contents. So this all goes to the remote computer, and both of them said, I have no idea what's in $log name. That is completely meaningless to me. Error, error, one from each computer. It is possible to do this, though. You just have to take a slightly different approach. At the beginning of your script block, define a parameter. You can put a comma-separated list of parameters in here. So let's actually work up to where we can do that. Let's kind of start the example over again. I'll prompt for log name, and that goes in $log name. So now I've got log name as a local variable, and I've got quantity as a local variable. I need to get both of those values off to the remote computers. So invoke command, computer. I'll put my computer name list first. And then I'll set up my script block. Inside the script block, I'm going to put a parameter block or parameter declaration. You can name these variables anything you want to, and it's just a comma-separated list of them. So now, in my command, I can use get event log minus log name x newest y. So what goes in x and y? Well, that's what my argument list is for. These go into the parameter block based on their position. So the first argument, log name, goes into the first parameter. The second argument, quantity, goes into the second parameter. PowerShell takes care of that mapping for me. So whatever was in log name is now in X, and whatever was in quantity is now in Y. So long as I use those appropriately within the command, then this should work correctly. There we go. So I got the latest, what was it, 12 from each. This is a pretty neat little technique. It's a great way to pass stuff in. Slight difference to it in PowerShell version 3. So what I just showed you was how it works in PowerShell version 2. So here in version 3, I'm just going to set log name up manually rather than using read host. You can do that exact same technique. Invoke command. And you don't have to use X and Y. You can call these, in fact, let's not use X and Y. Let's use LN and N. So log name and newest. In my mind, that's what I'm going to make those stand for. Get event log. There's the end of my script block. So now I pass my argument list, which is in order, log name and quantity. That's the same thing we just did in version 2. Only one of my computer names is not valid because I typed a comma instead of a period. Oh boy. Cannot bind log name because it's null. Because I didn't type. You guys are supposed to be watching for typos. Maybe it'll let me type stuff wrong. There we go. So that's the same thing we did on version 2. We have a slightly different approach we can use in version 3. I can get rid of my argument list. I can also get rid of my parameter area, and instead so what this is doing is it's created a special little identifier, $ using colon. $ using colon. My local copy of PowerShell takes a quick peek at the script block before it sends it off to the remote computer. If it sees $ using colon, it assumes what follows is a variable name from the local computer, and so it replaces all of this and all of this with the contents of those local variables. So it's substituting in the local variable contents before the script block gets sent off. And that's what makes it work. You get the exact same results either way. This is just a little bit less typing. You don't have to set up a parameter block. You don't have to feed in an argument list. So some folks find this to be a little bit more straightforward of a way of passing local information off to the remote computers. And you might be wondering, what if I have a different set of values that I want to specify for each computer? In other words, for DC, I want to send security as the log name and 10 as the quantity. But for member, I want to send application and 20. And can't really do that all within a single command. So the idea is that invoke command is sending the same command with the same arguments to all of the computers listed. If you wanted to do something different, you would need to use invoke command for the first one and then use invoke command separately on a new command for the second one. And that's the only way you would really be able to pass those additional values. So there you are. Working with output is really a key thing when you get into remoting. You're going to want to make sure you remote as much of your processing as possible so that whatever comes back from the remote computer is pretty much in its final form in terms of the content of the data, and you don't have to manipulate the objects that come back because you'll be really limited in the manipulation that you can do. I also showed you how to pass input arguments from local variables off to the remote computers so that you can collect information on the local computer and then use that to drive what the remote computers are doing. I hope this has been informative for you, and I'd like to thank you for viewing.